Welcome back to Hot Rod Guy Garage, and this is going to be another episode on the LT headed Cleveland project for my 70 Torino. So follow me along through the intro, and I'll be back. Alright guys, so since our last video got such a positive response, we're going to move forward with the Cleveland with the LT heads project. And in this video, I'm going to address some of the concerns. We're going to try to do a full mock-up on the motor, meaning both cylinder heads. And I'm going to try to cover what you need to do if you're going to try to pursue a project like this. So let's get started and see where we end up. So as you guys can see, I have got the cylinder head still on the block, which actually has been off about 3 times at this point. I took this head and I cleaned up the deck surface really well. I come in here and modded the head bolt holes. I actually just drilled them the next size larger. And I've got the head bolted down with a socket so it's tight to the block. I've had a bunch of people say and think these are LS heads, guys. These are not LS heads. LT heads are a lot different design than LS. And I've had some people talk about, well, if you put an LS head on the Cleveland, you're losing the canted valves. Well, you can see these valves are canted. And they are also slightly rotated in the cylinder, just like the Cleveland heads. Just like those closed chambered 4-valve heads that are sitting here on the floor. So there's lots of things not really changing in the grand scheme of, making the engine run here, but, we're not losing the canted valve or the valve angles. They're just a little different than the Cleveland stuff. So before you start with one of these projects, you want to make sure your head deck surface is clean. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my carbide scraper right here and I'm going to clean this deck surface up. Then I'm going to put a little 220 on the long block and I'm just going to scuff this off lightly. A lot of people will be scared to use sandpaper on head deck. These are going to go to the machine shop. But I pretty much want to have him a road map drawn out. That way he knows what I want done. So we need to get this head cleaned up, get the head bolt holes on this head drilled to the next size larger. That way it will bolt on just like this head. And I'm also going to go ahead and clean the block deck surface also and remove the factory dowel pins. We'll get into being able to locate those a little later in this video. But I did take and put the camshaft and the solid roller lifters back in the Cleveland. We're not going to be able to use the solid roller camshaft with this cylinder head set. We're going to have to go to hydraulic. But these are the Cleveland push rods that I had in this motor before. Right here. They are really close to working. And if you had a hydraulic cam, it looks like you would probably have about 40 to 60 thousandths of preload using those push rods. So, while different, you're pretty close to the same. And we all know you can get push rods real similar to Cleveland length pretty easily. They're a little bit longer than the LS or LT push rods, but the Cleveland push rods are pretty close to working. So before we go into time lapse, I know a lot of probably you old heads have never used a carbide scraper before. But these things are great, especially for aluminum head versus a razor blade. They don't dig in, but they will absolutely take every single bit of that gasket material off with just very light pressure. Alright guys, so got the head bolt holes drilled. And another thing you gotta remember when you do something like this, you need to use a deburring tool around your bolt holes, and that will clean up that edge. This one right here was this one from Mac tool set. Just running around through here a couple times, and that cuts any burrs from your drilling process. You want to run it around the top side too. But like I said, I just drilled these the next size bigger, which in this case is 9/16 over the holes that were already in this head, which is pretty consistent with what you see in the Cleveland head. As you can see, I scratched up the deck a little bit, poked it a little bit. Like I said, that's not going to be an issue because I'm literally sending these to machine shop, and I'm at least going to have a valve job done and have them decked. And I'm probably going to have him do a little chamber work in here to unshroud the valves, and probably weld in a quench pad to help out there. But I'm just going to take my 220 on this little short block right now, and I'm just going to kind of just lightly hit at this point. I'm just trying to pick up any kind of burrs that may allow this head not to sit on the block flush. Which is a big thing. When mocking something up like this, you want it to sit as flush as possible. Ideally, you want it as clean as possible, but like I said, these heads are going to go to the machine shop, so they're going to get plenty of cleaning there. I'm also going to send the block when I send the heads. Just get it a good clean and a check out, since we had the main bearing failure in it before. And we'll do any kind of oil system mods or anything to do with the bottom end at that time. But whoever built this poor Cleveland the first time, both in machine work and assembly things, done quite a poor job. I did not build this motor, as many have said in the comments before that I kind of done a disservice to Cleveland. I did not. I put together a motor that I had bought, and just changed some rocker arms and push rods in it, because it definitely had the wrong thing in it before. So I definitely wanted more power out of it, so that's where we're at now. Just trying to get this thing back together so I can get it in my 70 Torino, so we got a car that runs and drives again. This seemed the most promising budget way to do it. I think it'll be a pretty good result in the end. I think it'll surprise a bunch of die-hard Cleveland guys if everything works out like I have planned in my head, which generally they do, and then sometimes they don't. So one thing we're going to have to address, and I'm going to have to pull the other side back off and actually stick the Cleveland head gasket under it, was I covered in the last video, all our steam holes and water jackets preliminarily line up. The only problem I seen was we have one intersecting with the oil return into the block. I didn't think about it before, but I had a commenter say something about, why don't you just plug the block side? I definitely could do that. All we got to do is find a set screw that'll fit both these holes. Then we could tap them, use some thread sealer or JB weld around them, and run those plugs in below deck. And then later on, if I had to go back to a Cleveland head, we could take those plugs out without having to do any welding on the head. So when I mock this side up, I'm going to use the Cleveland gasket, which is going to be very important. For what we're doing currently at the moment. So I'm just going to roll it where it's semi-flat, at least close to semi-flat as I can get. May have to rethink that just a touch. Didn't think nothing about the other head being on there, but I just couldn't run it down my fingers. So I'm gonna just tilt it up here and grab my wrench. Give the engine stand a little snug down so it behaves and is all happy. So just gonna take our Cleveland head gasket, set it here. And the big thing about using the Cleveland, the LT and LS, just like Cleveland, use a water port in this location to get rid of the water out of the head. The water enters the back and goes out the front. So it's almost like it was meant to be, and seems like it's going to work well. So got our gasket sitting there. Let's get our head set on there. And later on in the video, we'll go through we'll scrap these heads for the water jacket and stuff differences. We'll go with it from there. But a lot of these I'm not going to run down all the way. Just want to make sure that since drilling my holes that I can get all our head bolts in. They're all happy. And the block side threads still need to be cleaned, so along with the head bolts that we're not going to use. So I want to at least get enough in this side to say, hey, this is going to bolt on. As you can see, they all start. And on the center upper here, I'm just going to use a socket for a spacer. Because it has thread sealer on these bolts. So I'm just going to run it down just like that. Just enough to hold the head flush. Before I pull this head back off, especially this one right here, I'm going to add a little light to this situation. As you can see, all our push rods are at normal angles like they would be in the Cleveland. And if you get up under here, we actually clear the head pretty well. Keep in mind those are 3/8 push rods, so they're very large. As you can see, we got clearance around the head where we need it. And I'm going to bring y'all around to the other side. And our push rods are in no way close to interfering with the cylinder head in absolutely any way down in there. So everything looks promising. I'm going to check our push rod length once I get that head gasket back on there, but I just kind of want to show y'all that before I forget about it. That everything seems like it's going to be happy as far as valve train geometry goes. Obviously, I can't spin the motor over and the camshaft over because these still have stock valve springs and stock rocker arms. And this solid roller cam, this thing is close to 600 lift, and the factory rockers won't allow that, but if you put a trunnion kit in them, you can pretty much run unlimited lift with them until, you know, you start getting into the bolt with the rocker arm body itself. But that's kind of a non-issue. You do gain a lot in valve train weight. Well, I should say you lose a lot in valve train weight compared to Cleveland stuff, because it's a lighter rocker arm, even though it's steel. You got a beehive style spring, a lightweight retainer, and a lighter valve. So there's a lot of promise, guys, in doing this. So keep an open mind when we talk about it. And if you look here, this almost looks about the same width as an LS Valley plate. So that might be an option to modify, but more likely we'll have to make our own. And one thing I did notice on this head with our water neck, while it clears, and I mean by the hair of your chinny chin there, the water neck is very close to the cylinder head here. So that'll have to be kept in mind for later. That might need to bevel this edge of this head around it a little bit, or possibly trim the water neck steel just a hair, just to make sure there's no clearance issues in that way. And if we have to deal with our alternator bolt hole, we can always have an aluminum bung welded on the head and drill and tap it to accept the forward bolt. That way we can use the factory alternator bracket. But we have our first look at it fully mocked up, so let me tear this head back off, put the head gasket on it, and we'll do some other comparison things and go from there. All right, so I went ahead and pulled this head off camera and put the Cleveland head gasket back under it. So everything's bolted down. I figured I would check what, let's just call it a mythical preload, because this is a solid roller cam. So basically we just need to see how much from zero lash it takes to move the valve before it's tight. And that would technically let us know if we can use Cleveland push rods with a hydraulic cam. And generally you want anywhere from a half to 3/4 turn preload up to 1 full turn. That usually gives you anywhere between 40 and 60 thousandths. So that's about 3/4 of a turn, and it's tight. So back that one all the way off until we're at 0. Back this one, we're at 0. So the exhaust valve, that's the intake valve. The intake is almost a half a turn, and the exhaust is about 3/4 of a turn. So that's promising there. Depending on how things go with the project from here, I might be able to use the same push rods I have, which would be awesome. It would save about $150. It's not much at all, guys. And like I said before, I can't spin the cam and open the valves because we get into the spring bind and we get into issues with the rocker travel. So that'll have to be addressed later. But I'm seeing enough good that this project's definitely going to be kind of a full go at this point. So let's set the Cleveland intake manifold on here, and I'll show you how much higher these ports are compared to a factory Cleveland head. And that's what's appealing here, guys. These heads are high ported on both the intake and exhaust. So think of a Yates Cleveland head like a C3 head. That's kind of how these ports are raised. So kind of level it up here, and you can see that the Cleveland intake definitely is not going to work, and that these ports are about half the port higher than the factory Cleveland ports. And what that means is they're going to flow a ton better. And each one of our ports on the Cleveland intake is dead center with the LT heads. So definitely going to have to get an intake manifold ordered. And yes, I know that it's going to have to be cut up and moved around, but we need to get an LT intake to see if it will sit flat on these heads. And then we can go into cutting the intake, and we'll get it kind of rough mocked up where it needs to go. And then we'll send these heads, the block, and everything to the machine shop, get everything finished up. So just playing around, I figured I would see what it would take to try to adapt our existing Cleveland intake to the LT heads. And it'll be quite ridiculous if somebody wanted to go that route, but it is totally possible, I do believe. And by totally possible, what I mean is to line the bottoms of these ports up. Now keep in mind, the Cleveland ports are about the same size as the LT ports. You would need, I've spent a lot of time trying to kind of square this up and different methods of spacing here, but you'd have to come up 4 inches on China wall. So that's 4 inches right there, or roughly about 2.5 inches on each side. What doing that would do, it would make it easy to bolt the intake on, because you could literally machine 2 plates here and then 2 end adapters here out of some aluminum. But obviously you'd still have some sealing issues in this area. So like I said before, I'm going to have to order an intake, an LT based intake of some flavor, so we can get it mocked up and see how close it is, how much the V is changed between the two, or if they're pretty close to the same. Looking at the valley area, it looks pretty close. I'd have to measure the LT tomorrow just to kind of get an idea, but we're roughly, about 6.25 inches between heads. I know that's not really the right way to measure it, but it's hard to measure and hold the camera at the same time. I just figured I'd share that little tidbit of information with you, just in case anybody was thinking about that route. But the ports do line up, and like I said, they're almost the same size on the intake ports. I know a lot of people, kind of doubted that in the first video, because when you look at Cleveland ports, they look monstrous. And then you look at the LT heads, and they look kind of small, but they're really almost the same size, guys. So the only good thing is at least we know now how we're going to have to go forward. So, as you can see in the video, I have made a cardboard valley cover. And what I've done, I just wanted to get it kind of a template where I can send it to a machine shop and get an aluminum cover milled to fit the dimensions and cuts of the heads that I feel will work well. So, if you would be interested in doing something like this, now I'll probably have to buy a few of these to make this a possibility, at an effective cost rate. Let me know below if you'd be interested in having a aluminum valley cover that would work with these heads. Just let me know down in the comments. But basically what I done, I took a cardboard template, and I just kind of eased up on my shapes, and this fits the valley wall perfectly right here on the front, and I done the same thing in the rear back here. I made it where it fit dimensions pretty darn close. So basically it's just a template to have an aluminum one made, or I may make an aluminum one. But just part of mocking this stuff up, guys, it looks like our valve train stuff will work once we get the right valve springs and put some trunnion kits in the rockers. It looks like our stock Cleveland push rods will work with a hydraulic roller camshaft instead of the solid roller that I currently have. So we need to get an intake manifold ordered, I do believe. So other than what's going to be done in the machine shop, like relocating the dowel pin holes and, normal stuff like a valve job and maybe some port work, it seems like it might be a pretty easy bolt-on deal. So what I plan to do, at least with the valley covers, guys, I would like to be able to offer you guys somewhat of a kit, which you would still have to have an independent machine shop do your dowel pins and stuff, or my cylinder head guy may entertain having stuff sent to him and him modify it. But just let me know what you think down in the comments below. I need to go upstairs and look at the intake manifold and see if I can't find something relatively inexpensive I can cut up and have modified. So I got the valley pan dropped off the machine shop. I should know something here probably tomorrow if they're going to get me a prototype pan cut so I can test fit it on the car. But I was at the shop and I was thinking, I'll just grab a set of these cheap head studs that were just kind of floating around, and we'll see how they compare to the Cleveland head bolts as far as fitting with the LT cylinder heads. Both these share a 1/2 inch head bolt. The Windsor and the Cleveland share a 1/2 inch head bolt, except the Windsor uses a shorter lower stud, which you can see here. And the lower studs will work out wonderful. And you would think that the uppers would too, but I know you can't see down in there, but I've got a light set up in this other one. It is about a 1/2 inch of shank showing. I'll show you right here. There's about a 1/2 inch of shank showing. You see this is tapered. This whole taper section is above the head bolt boss. So this is kind of promising, except for the fact that with these bottomed out in the block, we still have this amount of travel up here. So there's a couple of ways you can go about this. I'm going to look and see if there's any other options. I just need something about a 1/2 inch shorter for the uppers. The lowers will work, the uppers will not. Alternately, I could have some steel spacers made, or some hardened steel spacers, and you can put them over these upper studs that torque your head down and shouldn't have no issues doing that either. So just another step in the puzzle. But without having all this information, guys, and figuring out exactly what we can use that's kind of off the shelf for cheap, doing this head swap could cost more than an aftermarket cylinder head, which I know that's been a concern with a few viewers. That by the time you put all the work into these, you could just bought a set of the Pro Comp heads. Well, I trust in Pro Comp heads about as much as I do these Pro Comp studs, and that's the reason why they're still in the box. I've been there, I've got that t-shirt. Your cheap Chinese heads generally have a very poor valve job. They have very poor made valve guides. They have softer material valves. And while that may not mean much to most of you, if you were just driving around on them and cruising your car, a set of Chinese heads would probably last you a long time. But in something that you're going to turn RPM, or something with a solid roller camshafts that got stiff valve springs, those soft valves will actually tulip and eventually come apart and kill your motor. The valve guides and the cheap valve springs stuff come on them. You want to discard them valve springs anyway on Chinese heads. But the valve guides, once they wear out, you know, your valve's going to start flopping. You're going to lose valve sealing ability and a bunch of power there. Plus, they always need a ton of port work to flow what the flow numbers they advertise do. So 351 Windsor head studs are a possibility. And alright, I had at least a couple people ask me about 351 Cleveland valve covers on the LT heads. Once again, guys, they will not bolt on, but the two end bolt holes are very, very close to actually lining up over here. And if a man had those welded up, you could at least put 2 bolts in it. The upper 2 bolts are very, very close, within 1/8 of an inch, just like the corner ones here. And the bottom overhangs the side of the head over here. So it's not possible just to directly bolt these on, but you could definitely adapt them with an adapter plate. And then you would end up with the factory valve cover on the LT head. I may look into having some made later, but the valve cover is not grossly larger than the cylinder head. So that looks pretty good. Let me grab a Windsor cover and we'll see how it fits. So a Windsor cover, could it be adapted? pretty easy. Let's see. The Windsor valve cover, guys, is pretty darn close. The top center hole lines up. The two upper corner bolts could be drilled and tapped, but just like the other, we're overhanging slightly at the bottom. But it's a lot closer than the Cleveland valve cover. And I've also got an FE valve cover. Let me grab it and we'll see what happens. Which I don't anticipate any of these being a bolt-on, but wow. The FE cover, the top three holes, just like the Windsor cover, are close. They're even closer with the FE cover compared to the small block. But same thing down here at the bottom. We have a very slight overhang, nowhere near as bad as the Cleveland, but a little more than the Windsor. But they fit the ends of the heads great. And FE valve cover actually kind of looks right at home on there. I kind of like that. Which these are factory 390 GT covers. I can't believe that. Like I said, pretty close. You get at least 3 holes that line up. Very interesting. And for giggles, I have a set of 429, 460 valve covers, but I'm not going to assume that they're going to absolutely swallow these heads. They do. And they're way longer. It overhangs probably 3 inches at the back, about 3 inches at the front, no matter how you shift it. So you could definitely adapt a small block forward, a Cleveland valve cover, or an FE valve cover to these heads with a simple adapter plate. You would literally just have to have something with this bolt pattern and the other bolt pattern of the valve covers, and it wouldn't have to be very thick at all. You wouldn't even be able to tell there was an adapter on. Well, I was just down here playing around. Remember I said the Cleveland valve covers were really close? There's 2 stock Cleveland bolts holding that valve cover, and I'm saying holding that valve cover to that cylinder head. Now, if they're not the right thread, obviously that's 1/4 inch and the heads are metric, but I just finger, just snug them where they started. And some light mods, meaning light mods, you could technically bolt these little dudes on here. And it don't really look out of place. It does, however, make the engine look monstrous. And alright, we need to mark our head, our cylinder head. And what we need to mark it for is where we can see how the water jackets and things line up with the LT head. Like I said before, it looks pretty good, but we did have some coolant and oil crossing over each other. But we need to make 100% sure we can get this stuff marked without any hassle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop a bunch of head bolts in here to help align this gasket. You'll see we can still have a little bit of wiggle here, okay? But I just want to get it here where we're close. Where we can mark this stuff as we need. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take something sharp like a pick or a new Phillips head screwdriver, and I'm just going to take and lightly run around through here just enough to mark what I sprayed the cylinder head with. I want to check and see how close our fire rings are to any water jackets, and what this will do will let me do that. It will also let me mark roughly the dowel pin location. Where it needs to move in relation to our head gasket. And I'm also going to mark where our water jacket intersects with our oil return hole. And around our main water jacket here. And I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to mark the upper edge of the head gasket. I know our lower edge will be good. But like this back corner where it kind of overhangs, I'm going to mark it. I will mark up here at the other side top. And also across where our gasket does not meet completely in some places. And what this does is going to kind of give us a rough road map of what needs to be done from here. It kind of gives us an idea if anything's going to intersect or any fire rings are close to any coolant passages. And we're not close at all. We're within, it's at least a ½ inch away from where the fire ring sits, to all the water jackets, where our oil returns are. I said before, you could have these welded up partially. And when I say partially, guys, I mean literally somebody with a TIG would just run a little small bead in that corner on each side and it would seal. But we could also tap the block. We can kind of see the locations of where our head dowels are in relation to water jackets and distance. We're good there. And like I said, all these water jackets, they line up with holes in the head gaskets already. Every single one of these. So we're good there on coolant flow. And while we got 2 holes in the LS head, the Cleveland head gasket will seal the back head. Or I said LS head, this is an LT head. The comments on the last video has got me calling it an LS head, and it's not an LS head. They're totally different. So let me grab my other phone holder and I'll show you where I scribed everything. I'm not sure how this is going to pick up on camera, but you can see our fire ring on our head gasket here. And that cylinder, and that cylinder, and that cylinder. We're not close to any kind of water jackets. No closer than we'd be in any kind of factory application. Like I said, our factory oil return holes were right here. It's just barely going to intersect that hole. Our dowel pins, this would have to be opened up here and here. But everything, guys, looks good. I see absolutely no reason it work. This rear port is blocked off in the Cleveland gasket because it is blocked off in the Cleveland block. So no worries there. And instead of being a square, and you can see right here where I scribed it, instead of being a square, the LT head's kind of got an oblong little hole there. So everything looks promising, and there's absolutely nothing up here in this area that will affect anything. I had people talking about the water jackets. This is not a Windsor. This does not require the water mods that a Windsor does. Everywhere there's a hole, and you can see the impression from the Cleveland head. You look at the shape of that, what does that show you? They're the same shape. They're in the same shape and same locations. And I mean literally. I pulled this up just right above the water jackets. Now, your lower holes are a little different shape, but this will work just fine. And when in position, there is plenty of sealing area. As you can see, the LT head up here. There's plenty of sealing area for the head gasket seal. So everything looks pretty decent. Like I said, the only thing you're gonna have an issue with if you don't plug your block or have these little corners welded up, you'll have coolant in your water right here. Because in the Cleveland head gasket, this is your oil returns. Same over here. Literally, if there was going to be any welding done in this head, guys, it would be in this area. So everything looks good. I'm going to let my cylinder head porter / machine shop guy deal with the chambers. And I'll let him reshape them as he feels needed. I do think there is some gain here by unshrouding these valves just slightly. And we do have the room to do that, as you can see with the scribe marks. So it's going to give him a lot of freedom here. I'm also going to have him weld up the direct injection port. That way he can shape this quench area however he feels needed. And same way with the little small quench pad that we got going on down here at the bottom. I'll let him deal with this in any way that he feels needed. So guys, that covers just about everything I can cover in this video until I get my intake and get that valley cover back from the machine shop. So hopefully in the next coming week we can do another video and we can get this thing ready to go to the machine shop, which is about at the point it's at. There's still a few little things I've got to test fit and check out, but we're getting pretty close to that point. I see absolutely no reason this will not work. There's a lot more work to put these on Windsor, say a 302 or a 351 Windsor. But for a Cleveland or a 351M or a 400, these are going to be very easy to adapt. And I think the results will be good. Like I said, I'm going to have both the heads. I'm going to put the 71 4-barrel close chambered head and these LT cylinder heads on the same flow bench. That way we have data for both heads. And I'm going to have him do some light port work to the LT heads and seeing what we can gain there along with a little bit of chamber work. So pretty much, guys, that's going to be it for this video. So if you like these kind of videos, hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button because it does help the channel to grow and helps me bring you more videos like this. If you are a subscriber, I greatly appreciate you guys. So until the next video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.